All right, so back here, ministry, healing, and evangelism in small groups. We're talking about tonight, talking about community and how we have kind of moved from a place of community to a place of isolation. If you think about what George Gallup said, that Americans are among the loneliest people in the world, it kind of gives you an idea of why things like the social media have become so popular, like Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and different things like that, because it gives people an opportunity to feel like at least they're connected with information. There's a family that I'm very close to that are going through a very tough time battling cancer in a small child, and they had somebody who was a Facebook friend that drove 5 hours, and stopped by the hospital on the day that he was having a procedure done, and it kind of took the mother back a little bit, because she wasn't prepared to entertain somebody. She wasn't prepared to kind of have those emotions flushed out there in front of someone. But it's because that Facebook has kind of given the impression that, hey, we're going through this together, and so it gives that a feeling of community. So many people like to have the social media, or to have kind of these surface level relationships, because it allows them to feel quote unquote normal, but yet it doesn't really satisfy the need for community. So question is, why don't people live in community? There's a couple reasons that I've written down for the sake of this class. You may think of others that would be just as applicable, but for the purposes of this class, one that I see is fear of rejection. If you really get to know me, what if you don't accept me? And the other one is for selfishness. I would get involved with what's going on in your life, but then I wouldn't have as much time to focus on my own life. So those are kind of the two driving factors for why people don't live in community. If you look at the passage in John chapter 17, you see Jesus very near to the end of his ministry here on earth, and his prayer is that the people around him, the people that he's connected to, that they would experience unity the way that the Father, the Son, and the Spirit have unity, and that they would be connected to each other. And understanding the way that Jesus walked out his life when he was here on the earth, that it was always connected to people. It was always connected to the disciples. It was always connected to the people that he was involved with in ministry. It was always involved with the people that were following him. And his life was lived very much out in the open. The only times that you saw him stealing away time, it was so that he could have some time with his Father, some prayer time, some time to refocus and to kind of hear from his Father. A guy by the name of Francis Schaeffer says, our relationship with each other is the criterion the world uses to judge whether our message is truthful. Christian community is the final apologetic. I always find that it's interesting that, the Bible says that, the way that they will know you are Christians is by your love, for each other. It doesn't say they'll know you're Christians because, you have erected these incredible, beautiful facilities. It doesn't say they'll know you're Christians because you've fed the hungry, because you've clothed the naked, because you have comforted those who are sick. It says because of the love that you have for each other. And so there's a sense that community is what is going to really testify of Christ the most, is the way that we treat each other and the way that we live in community with each other. If you look at that, another author by the name of Randy Phrase says this: the development of meaningful relationships where every member carries a significant sense of belonging is central to what it means to be the church. That is a God-ordained gathering of people that is so strong that even the gates of hell will not overcome it. That the idea was that we would live in this community where people were able to be reinforced, people were able to grow, they were able to be encouraged, they were able to be challenged, and that as they walked out this life, they walked it out in a sense of understanding that they weren't an island and they weren't all of themselves. So what we're going to look at is we're going to look at how God created us to be in community. He created us to have one spirit, but to have different gifts and different talents, that it requires each of us working together to fully see him and to fully communicate him. If we were to be all encompassed in ourselves, where we did not need community, we could lock ourselves up in our homes, we could have all the comforts that our home could provide, we could read the Bible on our own, we could study the internet on topics that we didn't know, we wouldn't need to be in classrooms, we wouldn't need to be in church. We could sit there and watch, a ton of great men and women of God on the TV. There's stations that will broadcast 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the gospel message. You could sit up there on Sunday morning and not go to church. You could sit there and just watch the church service. There's a couple people that, in town that, typically on a Sunday morning when I'm getting dressed, I have the TV on that I love listening to. You could get everything that you think that you need without ever coming into contact with people. We live in a place where people completely do all of their Christmas shopping without even leaving their home. They go on the internet, they order everything that they need to have that they're going to give away, and they have it shipped right to their door, and they wrap it, and they've never even had to encounter the crowds. There's a commercial out right now for a new online college, and it has a bunch of kids, and one kid's holding a smartphone, one kid's holding an iPad, one kid's holding a tablet, one kid's holding a laptop computer, and they just go down the line, and one says this is a smartphone, and the other one says this is an iPad, this is a tablet, and this is a laptop. And they said, on this, I can go on the internet, and I can learn about this, and I can learn about that. And the whole idea is that there's no need for you to go away to college now, because everything that you need to learn, you can learn right here on an electronic device that you can have, just like tonight. There are people who are all over the world that are going to listen to this message. They're going to get the same information that you got here tonight, and they're going to take the same types of exams. They're going to write the same types of papers. They're going to get the exact same information that the people who are here tonight got. The only difference is they didn't have to drive. They didn't have to get out in traffic. They didn't have to encounter, the temperature of the room. They couldn't eat while they were listening. There's a lot of things that didn't have the comforts of being in your home listening to this message. But what I believe is that it's a continue to break down the sense that people are no longer connected to each other. You know, it's been my habit over the course of my adult life that on Christmas Eve, I go out somewhere to encounter people around me. You know, I go to, the Target, go to the Walmart, go to, fill in the blank store and see people, rustling around trying to get that specific gift or trying to find something, whether it took a while for them for the money to free up for them to be able to afford it, or whether they're just procrastinating, whatever the case is, they're out there and people can be ugly, it can be crazy. You see that the crowds that gather on the, what has become known as Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, as people fight over gifts. And you'll have these major chain stores that'll say, if you're here between 3 a.m. and 3:02 a.m., you could get this 50-inch LCD TV for $100. And they got 2 TVs and 1,000 people in line to get one of those 2 TVs. Got people camping out, 3 days ahead of time, missing work, missing their family so that they could be the first one in line so that they could get that item on that specific time. And it seems like craziness to do that. But yet, there's something about being out and being in it. There's something about going away to college or going into a classroom and encountering people around you, encountering questions and encountering people who may challenge you. There's something that has been lost in our culture. When I talked about earlier that I'd gone to help a church plant up in Memphis, Tennessee, and I lived in a very small town. Of course, it's growing. And I've been gone for about 7 or 8 years, so it's even bigger now. But it's a small town called Olive Branch, Mississippi. And it's one of those small towns that has a town center where you can go and you can walk the street, and they have the stores. And it's a very nice place. The people are very cordial. It's a very nice environment. And I lived in a very nice community. The neighbor across the street always baffled me because it would be this person, they would drive up to their home at the end of the day. They would pull up to their mailbox. They would roll down their window so that they didn't actually get out of the car, and they would reach over into their mailbox and they'd grab their mail, and then they would shut the mailbox, and then they would open their garage door. They would pull in, and before they even got out of the car, the garage door was coming down, And you never saw them. Never saw them outside, Every once in a while you see the garage door coming up and they'd back out and boom, they were gone, And out of all the time that I lived there, never once did we exchange a word, But yet there were other neighbors that they'd be out in the front yard and they'd come and they'd introduce themselves. Hey, notice that you just moved into the neighborhood. They would wave. And so you got to know people, but there are people that have kind of driven themselves into a place of seclusion. And I believe that life-changing moments can happen in small groups. I believe that when the walls get taken down, it allows us to be authentic with people. I am passionate about being in community and doing life with people. It's not always comfortable. Sometimes I don't get to do what I want. But I'm passionate about being in community with people. Me and my wife purposefully will take our camp chairs, or whatever you want to call them, the fold-out chairs, and in a couple of evenings a week, after dinner's over, we'll take them and we'll go out and we'll set them in the middle of the driveway, and we'll sit there on the driveway. And as people will walk their dogs or people are driving by, we just want to be out there and we want to encounter people. Because you know what? I know that the guy who lives next door to me can't affect my life, and I can't affect his if we never speak to each other. That somebody has got to break down that barrier. But as a result of me being in my front yard, you know what I know? I know that the couple that lives next door to me have been in ministry for 47 years and have established missions in China, missions in Africa, missions in South America, and they've lived this incredible rich lives that now we've had a dinner together that this man and woman of God that has so impacted the kingdom of God is now able to speak into my life because I let them into my world. We've got to get to the place where we understand that real change is going to take place when we break past the desire to be alone. In community, you have opportunities to get wounded, and you have opportunities to wound other people. We have, in our society, we have the difficult thing is we've kind of built our life into buckets, and we have these different buckets in our life. This is our work bucket, this is our neighborhood bucket, this is our church bucket, this is our family bucket, and we work really hard for none of those buckets to actually get mixed. If somebody from work walks into the restaurant and you're there with your family, it's oh, hey, how's it going? And you're a different person because you have to manage that bucket. At work I'm an executive and people have to follow what I do. At home, my kids are acting up. How am I going to let people at work see me in a restaurant when my kid's acting a fool and I can't make my kid do what I'm telling my kid to do, and now I'm going to have to go to work and tell them, you need to do this? I'm going to lose credibility if somehow they see me in a different light. I went through the Army, and I'll never forget, I was going through basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey, and while I was there, I saw the drill sergeant coming up, and he happened to have his kid with him. His kid was a son, about 5 or 6 years old. The drill sergeant was coming up. This drill sergeant was the toughest guy I'd ever encountered in my life. I mean, he was one of those guys that he had been to war, and and he had men in his command die. This was somebody who, when I looked at him, I thought, this is the toughest guy I'd ever met. And I saw him there with his kid, and I was looking with some anticipation that maybe you'd see the drill sergeant kind of sweep the son up into his arms, maybe give him a kiss on the cheek, to see a tender side of the drill sergeant there. And as I'm looking out the window, he doesn't see me, but I see him. I'm looking for this moment, and all of a sudden the kid steps on the grass and the drill sergeant drops his son to do push-ups. And I was like, well, I have not learned anything new about this man today. This man is the same to his son as he is to me. But, we tend to manage those buckets, and I believe that who God is calling us to be is to live out our lives and for it to be the same no matter where we are. You know, I was, I did a message, a class on marketplace ministry, and after being a senior pastor and a vocational pastor for many years, I have gone back into the workforce and held management positions. And I was at a restaurant one night, and there was someone there from work, and I knew the person rather well from work. And so when we saw each other, we were talking and we were chatting, and when we got done, I was like, all right, well, I'll see you later. And I reached out and I gave him a hug. And as his spine went stiff and his shoulders arched back, I realized that my buckets had crossed here. That though it's very common for me to hug somebody at the church or to hug a family member, that I had crossed some type of line here with this workmate, and he was very uncomfortable, and it's because two worlds had collided here, and he didn't really know how to experience it. So, not knowing what to do, I just leaned over and told him I loved him. I figured I've already lost it. Let's just go ahead. And he didn't talk to me much after that, which is fine. But it's a way that our worlds can kind of get mixed up. And so what I believe creates the opportunity for lives to be changed is for people to be able to be real and still be loved. For people to be able to be real and for people to still see value in them. I've led, probably eight or nine small groups over the course of the last 4 years, because God has me in a place right now where that's my focus in ministry, is doing small groups. And I've led different kinds of groups. I've led, life groups. I've led cell groups. I've led men's groups, and just to kind of encounter people on those small scale bases. And I realize that the challenge for small groups is, how do you break into a group and how do you break out of a group? And by break into a group, what it means is that if you are a ministry leader, you have to create entry points into your group, because if you don't create entry points into your group, then you will have a group of people that other people don't know how to break through and get into that group. As a child, we would play that game, Red Rover, send Johnny right over, and you would clasp your hands, and they would send that person, and you would try to hold the line so that they didn't break it. And if they didn't break through the line, then they had to join your group, Well, something happened along the way where, not even intentional a lot of times, but something happened along the way where we created these groups where people could not break into. And there are people who are hurting and people who have needs, but yet when they come, they always sense that they are on the outside looking in. And that's the reason why it's important to create entry points, whether you're doing a cell group, whether you're doing a life group, whether you're doing a Bible study, or whether you're doing a home church, or you're doing some type of needs specific, like a recovery group, anything like that. I always encourage people to take certain breaks with the group, because what that does is it allows people to exit who need to leave, and it creates an opportunity for people to come in that need to come in. If you don't have those breaks and you have somebody who wants to become a part of the group, sometimes they feel like they're the odd person out and they're there at the group, but that there's like an inside joke that somebody will say something, everybody in the group will laugh but them, and they don't quite get it. It's because they haven't been around as long and they haven't become a part of that culture in that particular group. And so it creates a place of being uncomfortable to them. Sometimes they'll fall away from that and end up not connecting there. Another thing is that you'll have people who will be a part of a group, and it will be a very growth enriched time in their life that they will have learned, and they will have gotten to know people, and they will grow. But then all of a sudden God leads them into a different season in their life, and they don't know how to get out of the group. And so what they do is they just quit going to the group, and sometimes they quit going to the church because now all of a sudden the people at the group are offended that they left. So I always encourage that no matter what type of group you're doing, that you create starting points and stopping points so that people will have an entry point and an exit point in the church. Many, many years ago, the idea of malls were that they needed to join all these smaller stores together so that people would come to a group of small stores. People would go to the Sears, or they would go to Maycoins, or they would go to Dillard's. They would go to that store freestanding by itself, but they wouldn't go to the store that just sold wallets, or the store that just sold hats, or the store that just sold shoes, unless they specifically had a need. So they had an idea that they would get a lot of different business owners, and they would put them together in one long, place that people could come and they could visit all the different stores. But you know what? Nobody came to the stores. Nobody came to the malls. Nobody found their way to this place. And so somewhere along the line, what they did is they decided that they would have what they would call anchors. They would have Dillard's come in, or J.C. Penney's, or Maycoins, or whatever it's called now, the different stores. And when those places came in, malls just absolutely blew up, because people would come to Sears, and then while they were in Sears, they would go out into the rest of the mall and they would see all the different other stores that were there. But what they were missing in the beginning was they were missing entry points. People didn't know how to get there, And I believe that what community does is small groups is it creates entry points for the kingdom of God. I believe that it creates places for people to break into the kingdom, and it gives them an opportunity. Small groups is an interesting thing because, and what we're going to talk about being specific and being intentional in what you do with small groups, because if you're not intentional, people will be frustrated. Where there's a lack of vision, my people perish. You need to have vision for what you're doing with that particular small group. So what we're going to look at is we're going to look at how you create those entry points and how you create those starting and those stopping points. So the last thing that we're going to talk about tonight is we're going to talk about the fact that the challenging thing is that community can be messy. And we have to be willing to endure the messiness of community sometimes. Because people don't do things exactly the way we do them. People don't feel exactly the way we feel. People don't parent exactly the way we parent. And sometimes in order to get to a place of that real ministry can happen is you have to see the messiness. Have you ever been around a group of people where everybody seems to be having a good time, and then all of a sudden you see a husband and a wife have an argument, and it becomes awkward for everybody? And you can tell that it's just kind of been hiding there on underneath the surface. Well, once you've experienced that with them, now you finally have an opportunity to be able to speak into their life. Now you finally have an opportunity because that wall is removed. You know, the messiness, I've shared this in other classes, so if you've heard this, I apologize, but it's pertinent to the message at hand, is when I was growing up, I grew up in one of those homes that you had what we called a den, which is where the TV was and the comfortable furniture, and you could eat in it. And then you had the bedrooms and the kitchen and the dining room, but then you had this other room that's called the living room. And the living room, if you grew up in a house that was like the house I grew up in, as a child, you don't go in the living room. You don't touch the furniture. You don't change the pattern ruts in the carpet. If you have an errant ball or something you're playing with that goes in there, as I had brothers, you're devising like broomsticks attached with tape and stuff, trying to lean over and retrieve that ball so that you don't actually get found in the living room. And heaven forbid, you end up in the living room and a lamp gets knocked over or something like that. And then, there is severe consequences that are awaiting you. Enough that you would lie and say it was the sibling who was not there, because to escape the surefire consequences. Well, as I started, really studying groups and studying community and small groups, I remembered that growing up in this house and then remembered the living room. And I remember thinking, it's interesting that they called it the living room, because there was no living going on in that room at all. That's not where you ate and where you hung out and where you watched TV and where you laid on the floor, where you wrestled with your sibling. There was no living going on there. That room was a museum. And then I remembered that on occasion that people would come over to the house and the people would answer the door, and your mother or your father would say, "Hey, come on in. Why don't you have a seat here in the living room?" And they would sit in the living room and they would have adult conversation, and they would sip, coffee or tea, and they would have these conversations. And I look back on it now and realize, that's kind of how we are with community, that we have these surface rooms that we allow people to come in because we don't want them to experience the real us, out of fear that they wouldn't accept us. You weren't going to have the guests come down the hall and see the kids' bedrooms, or to go into the kids' bathroom, or to go into the garage, or any of the areas that were not neat and tidy and fit and ready for people to see. And I believe that what small groups do is it allows people to get past the living room and into the other parts of our lives so that they can really see into us. A dear friend of mine, a pastor up in Oregon who passed away several years ago by the name of Ron Mell, defined intimacy like this: in to me see. And if you think about the life change that God wants to happen in small groups, you think that in order for those life changes to really happen, people have to become vulnerable. And the only way that people are going to become vulnerable is in those groups of people where they eventually feel connected and they feel valued and they feel loved. And you'll see it. If you've ever been a part of a group like that, you'll see it where somebody, does anybody have any prayer requests? And people will kind of test the waters. They'll go, yeah, pray for me because I had feelings of anger today, and you go, okay, so we're not really going to be real here, because we all had feelings of anger today, but the first time you get somebody that says, I need you to pray for me because I'm struggling with addiction, or I'm struggling with pornography, or I hit my wife. Now all of a sudden, cast everything aside, judge me however you want to judge me, but I'm laying it all out on the table because I'm hurting. Now all of a sudden you've created a place that's uncomfortable, it's messy, but it's a place where ministry really can happen. It's a place where somebody can say, you know what? I've struggled with things too. Here's what I've struggled with. And all of a sudden there becomes this mutual place of sharing, that there becomes this safe place for people to be able to talk to each other. I have two brothers. One just happened to move into my neighborhood, but has lived, a couple of hours away. I have my other brother who's here tonight that, we see each other as often as we can. He's really the one that calls the most. He's the one that kind of, as the eldest, takes his place to, keep the family connected and stuff like that. But, I encountered a guy years ago who had been homeless and had, through church ministry, had found an apartment, had found a job, and was kind of getting back on his feet. And I was talking to this gentleman, and he shared with me that he's got a sister that lives on the south side of town, about 25 minutes away, and has a brother that lives in Clay County, about 40 minutes away. And I go, well, when's the last time you've talked to your brother? He was like, oh, I don't know, probably 12 or 14 years ago. And it just blew me away because I'm close to my, closer than that with my brothers. But I realized that we're really dysfunctional when it comes to relationships with other people. And we could blame it on the parents, we could blame it on, the culture, but you know what I think it is? I think that we live such distracted lives that we just don't have time for people. I mean, you want to create an uncomfortable situation? Put a group of people together and let nobody talk. Just silence. It'll seem like an eternity. Because we're used to filling up the airwaves. I get onto my, I have 3 teenagers. I get onto my kids at times because I'll be sitting in the living room, the real living room, the room we live in, and the TV will be off, and I'll just be sitting there, enjoying the quietness of the day, thinking, maybe some things that I need to do. My kids will come in and they'll got to flip on the TV. I mean, you got to create some. They'll go from looking at their phone to looking at the TV to looking at doing their homework to doing this. I mean, and it's just this nonstop. And then when they finally get quiet, they fall asleep. And I think it's the great lie of the enemy. It's the hedges of the American people, of the world. It's something that is meant, to entertain us, and what it has done is it's preoccupied us. And so what I hope that we find out as we explore groups is that if you become intentional about sitting down with people, that it creates at least the forum where lives can begin to be touched and changed. So we're going to meet on Tuesday nights for the next 6 weeks, 5 weeks, I guess. And we're going to explore the different types of groups and how ministry, healing, and evangelism happens in those types of groups. So this concludes the class for tonight.